Well, welcome this morning in Southern California, evening in Russia and the Ukraine, to SoCal Loopers worldwide. Um, I'm Glenn Weber, and let me go over a couple things before we introduce our special guests. Today's presentation is on FreeAPS, the Ivan branch. Our special guests are Ivan Valkou and Kirill Chekanov. Let me briefly introduce our Loop admins. If you're on, please say something and wave. Joanne Milo.
Hello, everybody.
Cassidy Robinson. Sarah Goya.
Hi.
And Kenny Fox.
Hello.
Hello. And then me, Glenn Weber. And then our moderators, Carol Vatkin, Priscilla Faubel.
Hello.
Hello. And Mark Oldham. That was Mark coughing, I think. All right. Our meeting format, please keep yourself muted. If you have any questions, please write them in the chat. At the end, we'll cover chat questions and a short Q&A as time permits. Questions from Facebook Live will be retyped into the chat. Also, if I see some typing in Telegram, I will also speak those in also. Our disclaimer, the Loop is a do-it-yourself closed loop algorithm and self-built app interface developed through the work of community volunteers. While it may seem obvious, please consult with your healthcare professional regarding your diabetes management. Please understand that Loop is highly experimental and is not FDA approved. Therefore, you take full responsibility for building and running this system, and you do so at your own risk. Let me briefly introduce the Ivan branch. I've put on the location of the GitHub repository, github.com IVALKOU /loop workspace. Most of you probably already know where it's located. There's also a Telegram discussion room. I will put both of these links on the Loop site. So let me briefly introduce our guests. Kirill, or if you say it, I guess, anglicized, it's Cyril. He lives in the Ukraine. He is a software developer, primarily in C and .NET. He has a wife, no kids, is approximately 32 years old, and he was diagnosed with type 1 about 2 years ago. He started on Omnipod about 3 months after diagnosis, started looping about a year ago, and moved to FreeAPS, previously called the Ivan branch, once it was created. He is now using Android APS with the Omnipod. He's on the Dexcom G5, or was on the Dexcom G5 about 5 months, and then moved to the Libre 1. He loves playing games, board games, and watching movies and TV shows. Ivan is from Moscow, Russia. He is a senior iOS developer. He is single, 32. He was diagnosed in June 2017. He is currently using a Medtronic 722. He's been looping with FreeAPS since he wrote it, and was using prior loop versions going back about a year. Previously, he was on OpenAPS. His CGM is a freestyle Libre 1 using a Meow Meow and Spike. Ivan is a musician and plays many musical instruments. He loves cycling and foot biking. He is interested in science and history. So welcome, Ivan and Kirill.
Thank you. I will start over.
Yes, I've been using OpenAPS about 2 years, and everything is well. I'm happy with OpenAPS. Of course, I know about another APS systems like Loop and Android APS, and I followed the development of these projects. And my friend Semyon Kaiser made his own version of Riley Link with batteries like this, and I um, I did not plan order as the original version of Riley Link from USA, but here I got a device and just had to try it. I really like the simplicity of Loop and convenience, pretty UI, and I'm iOS developer, and I can make something myself, but I ran into several problems when I switched to Loop. First of all, there was no way to get glucose from Freestyle Libre sensors. This was critical for me. So the first thing I did was write a plugin that gets glucose from Nightscout. And as you know, the Spike application has a built-in web server and translate glucose over it. And it became possible to receive data offline. Then there was no automatic Bolus delivery. I was so very convenient. It was so very convenient on OpenAPS. It was impossible for me to abandon this feature. For several days, I thought about how it could be done. The first version was ready in 2 days. There was many security issues, but it works. I shared it in the Russian Loop community in Telegram. We discussed these problems and solved them. I solved them gradually. Several people get my version and tested it on themselves with me. I called this feature Microbosses, just like OpenAPS Super Microbosses, but it's not super because super mean the bolus dose include basal dose, but microbolus not include basal dose. That's why I call this microbolus. The next problem, there are no such features as auto-tune and auto-sense. And this task has not yet been solved. Then I was write to the lib chat and presented my work to the international community. It sparked explosive interest. I did not expect this, and it was very exciting for me. Unfortunately, for some reason, Pete didn't like it, and we didn't find a common language with him. I made a pull request to the main repository, but it could not be accepted. I didn't want to work. I didn't want my work to be restricted in any way. Therefore, I decided to develop the project separately from the main one. I renamed it to FreeAPS, just like OpenAPS, FreeAPS, and I get different app icon with purple unicorn. As you know, people started using my version more and more, and Pete saw that it was promising, and he created his own branch named Bolus branch. So FreeAPS is the reason for the appearance of Bolus branch. There are some other convenient but not noticeable feature in OpenAPS, like first of all, export and import settings. Then, yes, manual temporary bezel in open loop. If you open loop, you can tap on bezel icon, yes, and you can set TBR manually. Then the next feature is the amount of caps required on the application icon page. And switch between caps absorption models in the phone settings app. It's often asked why I choose the nonlinear adaptive model. It just seems to me more effective. I give more insulin. It gives more insulin in the beginning if glucose rises quickly, which prevent peaks. If carbohydrates are absorbed slowly, microboluses will flow more smoothly. Another question is why I don't want to introduce fat and protein counts. I know that some people eat a low-carb diet or maybe keto diet, but these are usually exceptional cases. I believe that any APS handles fats and proteins on its own in a normal situation. In difficult cases, I use a temporary override, and it helped me like 150% or more. And let's talk about plans for the future. Now, there are several areas where FreeAPS can be developed. The first of all, I am writing now remote control independent of Nightscout. There will be a separate server and a separate application. I call it FreeAPS Assist. This is a pretty big work. I made about 50% or so. Also, I plan to support Libra transmitters directly in loop. I know that man named Bjorn or Dabir, if you know him, already done the plugin which can directly works with Libra transmitters, but I will see on his work and maybe integrate in FreeAPS. Also, I plan, my point of interest is automatic adjustment of CR or ISF and ESF. Maybe make something like auto-tune or auto-sense like in OpenAPS. That's all. Thank you. Maybe you have some questions, please.
I'll mention one of the features that Ivan mentioned that Glenn showed. Glenn, you go back to do the closed loop and the manual
oh yeah, sure.
temp basal set. Yeah. So this by touching on the icon and being able to set your temp basal manually, this is super helpful for times when, especially your little ones, but anyone's going to be disconnected from your Riley link for a period of time. And there's a couple different reasons, right? One, you can set a temp basal longer than 30 minutes. So if you're pretty sure, like for example, my daughter went swimming the other day, and she had quite a bit of insulin on board. So I actually wanted the basal off for longer than a half an hour. If I had remembered about this feature in time, I would have done it beforehand and set it for like an hour and a half. I forgot halfway through swimming and remembered. But so you could do something like that if you're going into activity with a lot of insulin on board and you're going to be in the water, away from your Riley, away from your phone. Then you could set any lower, it doesn't have to be 0, but you could set a different temp basal if you wanted to. And the benefit to that is that the algorithm for calculating basal, so for example, Loop's always tracking your basal need, right? Isn't your basal rate may be changed, but it's tracking how much basal you have. And in my experience, exercise doesn't actually affect your underlying glucose production, doesn't affect your basal needs in your body, but it does make you drop a lot faster when you have insulin on board. So the fact that you can change the basal rate manually without running an override that could potentially change your insulin needs by doing, a 50% or a 70% or an 80% is huge. So you can just basically, I know I don't need insulin now. Loop won't be able to figure that out for whatever reason, in this case being disconnected. And it can run and then turn the temp basal rate will expire when you tell it to. So it's super helpful. You have to remember to go back into closed loop eventually, but it's definitely a good feature, especially for little ones swimming this summer. To be able to run a rate or at the beach or whatever, be able to run a particular rate longer. And then the lines, Ivan, you mentioned the lines, the visual lines on the graphs there. It's a simple update, but it, for those of you that are used to the standard loop, I find it difficult, as I'm sure Ivan did, which is why he made them, to figure out what time is right now. You're like looking up at your clock and then looking down at the graph and trying to orient yourself to when is right now and when is in the past and when is in the future. You can look at the latest glucose dots and kind of figure it out, but it's nice to have that vertical line all the way down the screen to tell you where it is. And then Glenn, would you go into the settings under Microbosses? So I think the big reason for me and for a lot of people, I think that initially start to switch over to FreeAPS is because you can change the partial bolus application % there in the app. So I knew how to change the code and I did it in Auto Bolus. It's not hard to change it from 40 to 50 to 55 to 60, but I wanted to play with it and figure out how much I could get away with my daughter's setup. So we're up to 70% now, but I wanted to be able to change it up and down and kind of dial it back and forth depending on the situation. I think that's a really neat feature, to be able just to change things in the app. I know it's not generally a thing that's done in Loop. They try to keep the settings very simple, so you have to go and do code changes to get the things you want. So it's nice to have these settings in the app and be able to change them on the fly. So thanks, Ivan.
Kenny, how often would you make those changes?
The partial bolus change? Actually, I haven't changed it much in a week. There was, I bump it up to like 60 and then it seemed like too much, so then I backed it down. But then lately it's been up at 70 and I've left it there for, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks now. But if she's going to go with someone else or be active and away from me, like at grandma's house and today, for example, I'll probably, just to be safe, turn it down a little bit. But I prefer having it up. Normally it's not an issue, and that way, when Loop says not to bolus for food because she's falling after playing, when it picks back up and blood sugar starts to rise, having a high percentage application is really nice. Catches it real fast. So, because with kids, their blood sugar rises very quickly. 1 gram of carb will move Tessa 20, 25 milligrams per deciliter. So it's nice to be able to hit those boluses quickly. So, and then nights are a little smoother. I don't have to artificially decrease the ISF quite so much to compensate for Loop's momentum that tends to project she's going to go low, but she's not. So I just leave the partial bolus application up pretty high, and it does a pretty good job managing overnight too.
Okay, so we got a question on Facebook from Jonas in Sweden. Do you see the base loop code being forked further, or will there be a merge in the future? And also, while he has another question, intelligent carb ratio and ISF suggestions would be super helpful.
Is Ivan
He's
still
muted.
on? Okay.
He just muted.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, there you go.
I partially didn't understand because it's harder for me to speak in English. What about merging my branch into the main? I use modern iOS frameworks that works with iOS 13 or higher, but the official loop supports iOS 10, and it's not possible yet to merge my changes into this branch. I speak about it with Pete, and he tells me that Tidepool already used SwiftUI and Combine, which I use, but in nearly 2 years, this not been merged in the dev branch. Sorry, I not understand the second part of question. Maybe Kirill helps me.
From what I know, like the adjustment of your settings, like CR or ISF dynamically, is kinda a thing in integral retrospective correction. I don't know. I don't remember actually the author of that, but Loop used to have this in JoJo branch or by Kate Simon, and the author of this integral retrospective correction, he has a lot of experiments on dynamic settings and dynamic figuring out of the settings, but he doesn't. He's not really sure about his experiments, and he's not really pro using his work for now. So for now, I guess figuring out your setting should be done manually by yourself.
Yeah, there's a conversations in Zulip. I think it's Dragon, I think is how you say his name.
Yeah. That's the one.
Yeah, he did the integral retrospective correction, and in any case, people were talking about what do we do about dynamic changes when people are high and trying to correct for that. And one of the suggestions that kind of sort of in recent days has sort of come up is just making the retrospective correction stronger, which is a code change. So maybe you can add a variable in FreeAPS so you could mess with it and toggle it up and down and kind of see what works best. But it's currently set like a 1 hour window of time to basically compare what the predictions were over the last hour to what actually happened. And then based on the difference between what happened and what it predicted, it takes corrective action, whether giving less or more insulin. That's what the idea behind retrospective correction is. So some people suggested just increasing the retrospective correction window from 1 hour to maybe 1.5 hours or 2 hours. And that might make it more aggressive to take action when things don't go as planned, like you end up high, probably because you didn't enter enough carbs or something like that. So it's an interesting idea. I haven't tried it myself yet, but if I could, change the setting, the window of time dynamically in the app, wink, wink, Ivan, we could play with it a little bit more.
Dragon not suggest me to use his IRC.
Not necessarily IRC, no, but even just the built-in default RC. There's a you could
Okay.
probably just
I
extend that
tried to
window.
figure out how to AutoSense works in OpenAPS, but it's so difficult.
It's busy, yeah.
Okay,
Well,
wait.
even Android apps. What?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, even Android apps uses this JavaScript part of OpenApps that is responsible for AutoSense. It doesn't use the what's the other one? Autotune. So it just uses the AutoSense, and it just takes the JavaScript file and it runs it like it is. So they
Yes.
don't they hadn't rewritten that in
Black
Java.
box.
Or, yeah. So that's like a blob, like a black box that does its magic, and then gives the number. Yeah. As for the changing the RC, we never like really saw anything about that, but that is an option maybe to add some settings for that and to change the included part of the. But like I guess we'll discuss that with Ivan afterwards.
Yeah, there seem to be some questions or coming back around fat and proteins. Stephanie says fat and protein clearly has a big impact on our son's blood glucose, especially overnight, about 2 hours post-meal. Is there any plan to include FPU? So it seems to be coming up a lot, and she says they are not on a low-carb diet. It just impacts his blood sugars.
Well, from what I understand, the original like idea was that you deal with the fast rising from carbohydrates with bolusing, like manual bolusing or auto bolus. You just enter carbs, and you like the APS, like the system itself, should deal with all the rest originally. And like if it's not, then well, there's definitely an option to use to calculate that FPU unit and put some fake carbs for now. And I don't know about any plans on like asking for fats and proteins, and the impact is quite personal, I guess. So like there is like no no setting that is applicable for everybody. So it's hard to maybe implement. I saw a fork of Loop that does this, like that asks not only for carbohydrates but also for fats and proteins. But like it assumes it uses the same idea that is available in loop tips, where it counts this FPU unit, and then it assumes that like that unit is equal to 7 grams of carb or something like that. But I've heard a lot of people like saying that it's not true for them. Actually, in Russian groups, there are lots of people claiming that it's not like that for them. Plus, the original FPU counting here assumes that this unit is equal to 10 grams of carbohydrate. So, like as I said, that's really personal, and I'm not sure like if that's tweakable. I know a lot of people that don't care about like fats and proteins at all, so they just they consume them, and they have issues only with really high amount of that, like when they have a lot of meat or something like that. So
yeah, when we talked to Robert Silvers, who helped write the FPU branch, you're right, he has extra settings in there and in his shortcut that he has created as well to dial up or down sort of that ratio, the how many carbs is equal to a fat or a protein, because it's kind of specific to each person, and I think partially because sometimes people, if they consistently have this common amount of fat and protein, they're already covering it in their carb ratio, at least part of it. So the tail, the end of it, is always the hard part. So you're right. That's Robert has a couple of extra settings that makes Loop a little more complicated to try and figure out, well, how much is it for you, which is definitely a challenge.
Yes, and I believe some people are using FPU with FreeAPS. I don't know if
They're
anybody
using the
is.
shortcut.
Yeah, they're using the shortcut.
Yeah. It's just just the plain loop, the original loop, is dealing with this rise afterwards when you had like a lot of fat or protein, but it deals with that slowly. And FreeAPS just allows you to to make this process faster.
Yeah, I agree. Turning up
because of
the Bolus application definitely makes a big difference in handling fat and protein rises, for sure. Even just having the boluses instead of temp basal is huge.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, I found the partial application of 80% more useful for me. But when I go on like a walk or something, I just turn the microbosses off by the override. I don't remember actually speaking about the feature, but I was blacked out for some time.
That's true. That's in here.
Right.
You can see the bottom there. Glenn's got it up there. Disable microbolus when enabling a temporary override. And then you can say just in general, or you can pick a number. So if your override's correction range is above a certain number. So my daughter, we do like 130. So I put 130 there. If I have any override I have running that has a target correction range of 130 or more, automatically turns off the microboluses. That's kind of a neat feature. That way, because sometimes it's hard to tell Loop exactly what you're doing. When you're setting a higher override, it's probably because you have activity, and so it's an extra safety. I like that. Thank you.
Yeah, that's like actually two applications there. It's either your activity or you're treating low.
Exactly.
So, so, well, that's the feature that had a lot of issues with wording, because even now with the wording we're using right now with the description, people tend not to understand how that works. A lot of people assume that your blood glucose has to be more than that amount to disable microbolus, but not the override itself. So that's hard.
Yeah, well, and I'm gonna try to do a little video on correction ranges because there's some things I didn't understand about them until recently. But that's naturally, if your correction range is at let's say 120 in this picture here where Glenn is, then the system's not going to give you more insulin, whether an increase in temp basal or a microbolus or an autobolus by default, the way Loop is set up, until you go over 120 anyways. So if you know that, then your wording here makes perfect sense, because it's like, well, Loop already does that when I set a higher target, but this here is disabling it if you have an override on that has a threshold that's that high. Just turns it off completely, which is great. But actually, I like how you guys do that, though. In Telegram, you're very, I don't know, this much more active group where they're willing to participate in figuring out how to like put wording and descriptions and things that are hard, because you need other people's perspective to understand like how you should write something in here. And so I like that. I think it does feel a little more open to suggestions when you guys are building something new. So that's a nice way to engage people. So thank you for that.
Kenny, by chance, do you have any of the safety items on?
No, me personally, for Tessa. I don't do the allow when under, and then because that's just different than Loop's algorithm. Originally, I did want that, but I found it's probably safer to not, because I have the microbolus percentage up so high. And then allow microbolus when sensor value is invalid. That one I turn on. I turn that one on because we're using the G6 and the sensor values are pretty accurate on my daughter. And do you remember, Cyril or Ivan, what's the threshold for when you guys say invalid? I think it was like 20% change or something like that. What triggers when you see a jump in blood glucose? When does the system consider invalid?
There's no threshold in Loop per se, because for now we did offload this work to the CGM itself. So whenever CGM marks the record as invalid,
the mark.
I know.
Okay.
So yeah, that's totally dependent on the CGM you're using, and it's up to it to mark it. Like the yellow exclamation point where you can see near the blood glucose value. So when you see it, it means that the CGM marked this record invalid for some reason. And we have a small issue here that we don't have many Dexcom users. People in Russia and in Ukraine that are using this are mostly on Libre, and usually they use either Spike or Diabox. That's the application for the transmitter called Bubble, and we know the Spike does this calculations of the noise level somehow internally, and specifies the value as invalid. Invalid is actually a term used like the state used in loop code. So we just we just see that it's like invalid, and we don't do the microbolus. But we're not, and we can influence the diabox because we know the developer. But we never know how Dexcom actually handles this.
Oh, you don't? Bummer. I was curious if you did.
No, actually not. So, that can work not as intended with Dexcom, and a lot of people were complaining. That's why we've added this checkbox to allow microboluses when the value is invalid.
Yeah, it's great.
Especially, I know that Dexcom marks the record as invalid when it asks for calibration. The G5 especially.
Oh, the G5. Okay.
Yeah, because according to the loop docs, you can see this exclamation point when the system asks for calibration. So you won't be getting any microboluses in that case. So if someone can provide us with more details on how to figure the noise in Dexcom more or better. We started actually with the threshold. We took the 20% increase in that case, and that's exactly what OpenApp does.
Okay.
It won't give you any super microboluses.
So that's gone now, and you're just using whatever loop says is invalid. That's interesting. Okay, yeah, I'm curious. I wonder why the G6 would pass an invalid marker into loop, or why loop would pick that up, because there's no calibrations needed. But thanks for the background on that. That's interesting.
The only time I ever see the explanation point on a G6 is when we have the app, that warning that the app's not compatible with 13.6.
Yeah, the warning. Yeah, that little screen that pops up.
And hopefully that's not passing through as invalid, because that has the explanation point, but I've never looked at it.
And I've seen it when you get a rare thing where the Dexcom shows no arrow. It's just a reading with no arrow, like it doesn't know which way to point.
Right, it's because there's no established trend. So you've had an up and a down and an up and a down in the last 4 readings.
Yeah, interesting.
I'm going to come to two questions. On the AB branch, when we enter future carbs for 2 hours in the future unbolused, AB starts delivering boluses right away, so we don't use it anymore. Is that a bug?
That is not a bug. So that's using Loop's calculated the calculated insulin sensitivity, mostly to see how much insulin Loop calculates you can get away with giving early. So it's trying to give insulin as early as it can, as soon as it sees you need it. So a combination of how it's modeling those future carbs and raising blood sugar, and what Loop projects you can get away with in terms of not making you go low initially. So so if you set that for, is that ahead of us?
That's it. I had it for an hour ahead.
Okay, so you can see how it's curving down, and so it's estimating it can give 6.2 units without making Glenn go low. Now, I have found the same thing, whereas if you put something out a few hours ahead, sometimes it's a little bit too much, even with temp basals back in the day when we were using those. So either the ISF's off, or the food's just not hitting the way that Loop is modeling it. So
I find it doesn't work if you go too far ahead, because
or too big a number.
Yeah, because I set my ISF intentionally too strong. So usually, if I do a carb entry ahead, I will do it for 5 grams of carbs an hour ahead if I just want to get down before target, before the food time.
So I'll wrap this up because it's not part of FreeAPS, but yeah, essentially what you can try is to try making the absorption time longer, 4, 5, even 6 hours if you need to, just so that Loop doesn't expect as much of a push rise from the fat and protein you're entering out in the future. Loop will still count all those carbs, so don't worry about that, like it being too long, but that can help sometimes, so that Loop doesn't expect a big jump. So we'll be less likely to give insulin to counter that jump that it thinks is coming. So you can see how it's much more mild there.
When you just said that you put in 5 or 10 carbs, is that different than doing a pre-meal, hitting pre-meal setting?
Yeah, I don't know if you notice it, but I don't even have pre-meal highlighted on my screen because I don't have it set up.
Okay.
It's annoying and in the way.
Okay. So here's a question. How is the partial bolus being calculated?
So, I mean, Cyril or Ivan can correct me, I guess, but it's taking the bolus recommendation and then doing a percentage of that.
Yeah, so in my case, like at 10:09 a.m., it enacted a 0.4 unit microbolus.
You see the bottom there.
38.1% of the recommended 1.05. So I had a recommended on my screen. I would have had a recommended if I'd hit the bolus button of 1.05 and it implemented.
Go ahead and tap that.
Which is 30.
Untap that last event. So this is kind of neat about FreeAPS too, is just sort of like your own brain, like to actually know what Loop is doing. Ivan's done a nice job. I imagine initially just to kind of track what was happening, but it's nice to be able to see what the system was doing and why, so you can see the last few actions, what it did and why. So it's a percentage of the recommended bolus.
Yeah, originally it was rounded down, as far as I remember.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you get the suggestion that like that should be rounded before to be delivered through your pump. It was rounded down from what I remember, and then someone came and said that in not in dev actually, but maybe in AB branch, yeah, they changed that to be rounded to the nearest available value.
That's
and
my
we
fault.
Implemented that. Yeah, that's why you can see like 42% the fourth row and 38% sometimes. So like the rounding is really different right now.
Yeah,
and that actually could lead to you getting more insulin than you need, and then Loop shutting off the basal,
exactly,
the basal rate.
I have noticed that.
Especially when your basal rate is really low, then you can get that.
Yeah, I asked for that from Pete because of how overnights are being handled, because of what I understand now. I probably should have said it more then, but it was more the momentum. Like this system assumed she was going to go low when she was at 0 insulin on board and was leveling out. But the system presumed she was going down, so it kept the basal off longer. So I wanted that little bit of extra like rounding up, which was nice. But then I've noticed over the past few months that it means that there's a lot more time overnight because my daughter's basal so low. That's actually turning it down or turning it off because the bolus is giving a little bit more. It's sort of like a super microbolus in that sense. That it's giving a little bit of the basal on accident because it's rounding up. And so I don't know if it's perfect. I mean, it's nice. I like the performance. It does look funny on the graph. It makes it look like your basal's turning off all the time overnight. So I don't know.
There's another question about partial bolus. Is it based on the max bolus or the max basal?
That's a good question. Ivan, do you have I know Autobolus has this, but does FreeAPS put a cap on the biggest bolus that the system can give based on the max bolus defined in the system? Does that make sense?
It's dependent. Sorry, I'm answering that, not Ivan, but like
it's independent.
It's based on the max bolus setting. Now, well, it's totally dependent on the max bolus setting.
Okay.
It won't deliver more because Loop won't allow that. It's not dependent on basal in any way.
Okay.
Although we had this initially, but because obviously super microbosses in OpenApps does that, and we skipped that idea. So for now, you're just and you end up with the limit of your maximum bolus.
Okay. So the difference, guys, between this and auto bolus, it's an interesting feature, is the auto bolus branch that Pete built will applies the partial application factor to the maximum bolus. So if you if it will only do, it'll do the smaller of, or say it'll do up to 40% by default of the maximum bolus. So in the case of Glenn, if I had set it to 70% partial application factor, it would do 70% of my daughter's max bolus as kind of a safety cap. Whereas FreeAPS is just using the full max bolus as the maximum we can give. I don't know. I think it's fine either way because you can control the partial application factor. It's really not that big a deal. But that's a safety mechanism in auto bolus that's not in FreeAPS.
Okay, we have a suggestion. It would be great to get an alert when there is a recommended bolus. Otherwise, my son never notices.
Well, isn't that? I mean, that's part of the beauty of
That's
turning
part
up
of the beauty
the
of Audibolus is
of
you
turning
get
up the So I mean, if it's an issue where you have a teenage son who's not noticing, I think the best solution is going to be to just to get comfortable turning up the partial application percentage up to 50, 60, 70%, or I think it's what you said 80 is what you use. You know, work your way up on it, just like we did max basal back in the day, right? Or creep your way up where you feel like it's safe to do. And then essentially the whole bolus or most of the bolus is given. I think, Ivan, you've mentioned before, that's your goal, right? You don't want to have to pay attention to if a bolus is needed, so you turn it up so the system can just give it to you, right?
Yep.
Sorry, he's muted. So yeah.
Hey Kenny,
Yeah.
Have you seen omnipods get more trashed by AB and FreeAPS?
I have not. Some people have mentioned that they have seen more omnipod failures. I have not seen anything
I haven't
like
either.
that. I mean, and in theory, I think people were talking about it in Zulip a long time ago, and when Ivan built this, is that it should actually be less work on the pod because there's less communication. You're not canceling a temp basal, then setting a new one like you do in Loop. You're just simply sending a single bolus command. There's not less back and forth to deal with. So I don't know. I haven't seen that.
Okay, there's a suggestion from Jonas, a feature request. Change the look of the bolus icon if FreeAPS has a recommended bolus, like a glowing or blinking perhaps. Says I often have to click the icon to see if FreeAPS suggests something.
That's actually the same as the previous one, like the way to notify if you have the bolus suggestion. And I don't see a point of that if you're using the auto bolus. And like if you have the bolus suggestion, it means there's something wrong with the settings. Usually in a regular loop, when it can handle that by the basal and it wants you to bolus. Even LoopDog says that these boluses are not like not a thing to do, like that you must do. You should consider that, but not necessarily.
I think we just got a suggestion, Kenny, that perhaps you give at some point, we'll do another event, a quick overview of all the options that are different from the dev version and how and if you use them. And along those lines, as I listen to all of you speak, perhaps we need to do a tutorial with Ivan and Kirill on how to use FreeAPS, an actual tutorial or a simulated teaching event, because there are lots of features that I know I'm not using. I think a lot of other, I'm seeing a yes exclamation point. You computer science people are already using every feature that's out there, but many of us are not.
Yeah, maybe Glenn and I can take a stab at listing. I think we've done it before, listing.
Yeah,
there's lists of the features, but I have a list I send out to people that want to get set up on FreeAPS. I tell them what I use. So I could do that. That'd be fine. And then maybe Glenn and I can just record him and I, so it's faster, and then I can let Kirill and Cyril and Ivan take a look and make sure we didn't mess it up or miss
And
anything.
what I actually find is the default settings are actually like pretty perfect for me. I do switch back to the other carb the standard
Carb model, yeah.
loop model, but I'm an older guy, so I'm a little bit slower absorbing than some of the younger people that might be on it.
I just find the other carb model that's default in FreeAPS a little aggressive for, like, I like it. It's a little aggressive on my daughter, not too bad, but I find it's a little aggressive for people who don't, or actually can cause late highs for people that don't understand how the absorption works. So until I feel like I have a good quick video on how carb absorption works in loop, I don't recommend using the more aggressive adaptive nonlinear model. But it's a super awesome model, and it's by default it's on, and it works really well. It definitely will stop those highs early. So yeah, for some people, especially those little kids, I just feel like until I can explain how the absorption works and why that model is a little different, and how to best use it, it's probably safer for them not to use it. So.
All right, I see from Emma, FreeAPS for my son, love it. Would be happy also to get remote bolus, remote carbs. Any plans for this?
Ivan mentioned he's going to build a little app that's separate. The current version that's out there uses auto bolus and remote bolus and carbs using Night Scout, and Ivan just mentioned he was going to make a standalone app instead of building it out of Night Scout. So I guess that's why everyone's waiting, holding their breath.
Yeah, for now, I guess there's no way on doing anything with the FreeAPS aside from setting a remote override, just as the dev does, and it's even passed to the master, from what I know. I know a fork that extended the idea that you can enter anything you want in the Night Scout, and the loop received that. They've extended the security, and now you can bolus, you can add carb, you can set the override, more safe than the temporary override, remote temporary override feature that is right now, because the current implementation in master and dev is really unsecure. Like, if I know the address of your Night Scout, the chances are I'll be able to send, you need the Night Scout address and the device token. That's kind of easy to get, semi-easy, I'd say. So the idea of extending that feature was not an option because of that. Like, if anyone with this information can bolus you remotely, that's not that really good. That's why the guys that made the fork, they increased the security. They added this the key exchange and everything. And I saw that fork that does that, and it requires changes both in loop and in the Night Scout. But before we discovered that fork, Ivan was mentioning that he wanted to build a system. From what I know, it's almost done, because like he teased some videos of him doing the stuff and showing the application. And since he already did that, we saw no point on getting to that fork.
Ivan's leaking secrets like Google and Apple. little cheater.
Actually, he was quite transparent about that, and he mentioned that that's what he did, and that's what he's doing. And so
I think that was agreed on in the group early on, that a standalone app would be more secure for sure. Yeah. And I think the changes that these guys have made in Night Scout are actually in the current dev. You don't have to get a special version of Night Scout anymore, but I'm just guessing because I just saw those options show up in there. But yeah, it was a special version of fork of Night Scout and a special fork of
I saw the changes actually in code, but I'm not sure if they are.
It might not all be
already.
There.
Yeah. So I'm not sure. I can look that up if you want, but
that's right. I just updated dev Night Scout, and looks like it's
Yeah.
there, but I haven't done
Another
comments.
thing, another issue here is that like $100 a year is not really cheap for us people here in Russia or Ukraine. So most people don't have their own like dev account to build the loop. So it's not they are not able to use the like remote override.
Gotcha.
So the remote bolusing and the remote carb entering is not an option either. Then.
That makes sense.
So yeah, that's why the server that is written right now by Ivan is handling everybody's like loops. It handles them securely and decides from each other, so separating two users. So that's the initial idea behind that.
All right, we have a question about microboluses from Jonas again. If I have my microboluses set to 65%, but doesn't that mean that 35% of the bolus is left to the user through the recommended bolus?
Yes, that's true. But then in the next 5 minutes, it will do 65% of that. And then the next 5 minutes, we'll do 65% of that. So it will get down to near zero. And then once it rounds up now, so it'll get down to, if everything stayed the same and your bolus need stayed completely consistent, which we know doesn't typically happen, then eventually, within, if you're at 65%, you're going to get the vast majority of that bolus very quickly within, 5 to 15 minutes. Whereas using the traditional loop temp basal method, if everything stayed the same, it would take at least a half an hour to get you all that insulin, and it would be even, right? It would be spread out evenly. So yeah, and actually by comparison, it's in Zulip chat, but I think the math Pete did was basically a temp basal will give 17% of the insulin in a given 5 minute period. So keep that in mind, that the default loop setup you guys are used to with temp basals is 17%. So starting at 40 is quite a big jump, and then going to 65 is an even bigger jump. So it's awesome, but it's also a lot more insulin, a lot faster. So
yeah, when FreeAPS appeared, that was the main concern of Pete. That for now, Loop uses the 17% application rate because of the basal, and he wasn't sure that people need more, and he wasn't sure that would succeed actually. And Ivan still tried, and people like that, and that's why I guess Pete decided to create the AB branch.
Yep, and he went with 40% to start. It just, no scientific number. He just picked something. So
yeah, that's true. But like, I guess that was like a compromise between safety and still increasing the base. Application.
It's huge. It's huge.
All right, Glenn has a question about the update for iOS 14 that's going to be released soon. Once it comes out in September, have you started playing with iOS 14 beta?
I know people that successfully ran the FreeAPS on beta. I saw people mentioning that, at least maybe a couple of them, but I'm still like, I have the 13 version, but as the beta wasn't available when I switched to Android apps a month ago. So I'm not sure like if Ivan is using the beta or if he stays on the 13 version.
Don't use beta.
Don't
Do you use beta?
No, I use 13. I use 13.
Okay.
But I tried to build on iOS 14 successfully. And I know people, like say Kirill says, that who successfully run FreeAPS on iOS 14.
Awesome.
I'm curious, with all the commercial closed loop systems that are being developed, have you guys looked at working with any of the mainstream device manufacturers to incorporate FreeAPS? Oh, I see a smile. Okay.
like we know, Tidepool is developing the commercially available system. I'm not sure that it will have any kind of auto bolus. And as for the free app, I don't see how we can incorporate that into any of the systems. And since we only have Medtronic pumps in Ukraine and Russia, and Akucheck, yeah, Medtronic and Akucheck. Medtronic has their own system of closed loop, and I don't know any plans on Akucheck pumps to have their own closed loop system. So,
But are you saying they wouldn't want to hire you or Ivan? Come on.
The thing is, like, this stuff is open source. Do they need to hire us to just use the code?
Okay, question. Is there any possibility of having DIA settable by the user in FreeAPS?
That's a tricky question because, like, mostly it's really rare that you have to change that number.
It is rare. I agree. It is, and I know with like LoomJev coming out, people are probably going to want to be playing with that, but and modifying it. But
LoomJev should be fine with the FreeAPS model.
It'll be close, yeah.
Yeah, I saw people mentioning that it's really close to FreeAPS, and we'll see how that goes. And creating this possibility of changing the DIA would lead to people jumping from the pump settings to the loop settings to first to tweak that setting, and loop will undercalculate the boluses, and that's not what we want, actually.
Yeah, I agree. I think the challenge is that it's people jump to that first, and that's one reason it's not made easy, John. I mean, what Katie suggested to me when I was testing it out was, Glenn, would you go to the settings and go to your insulin models? Insulin model. So what I was doing, what Katie suggested, because I was trying to find my daughter's DIA. It looked like she was kind of in between basal rates. So I was trying to simulate an in between basal rate using the DIA to make it a little bit better. And so what you can do is when you go and build it, there's a link in a picture in a screenshot in LoopDocs that shows you how to do it. But I just changed each one of these. So I made the peak times and the peak times all the same. So like basically make all those lines look the same under like the same as adult. So I made the peak times all 75 minutes, and then I changed the DIA on the child and the FIAS one to make them different numbers. And so then you could switch between those three to go from 6 hours to maybe just less and just under that. Like 5.5, 5 hours, 45 minutes, and 6 hours, for example. So then you can just, when you do your build, you kind of have 3 DIAs to pick from with all the same peak times, because you're usually not switching between FIASP and Humalog or whatever. You're not going back and forth typically. So if you're not using the other 2 models anyways, you can just make them all the same on the peaks and then change the DIAs. That's what I do. And that's how I have my daughter set right now. So she has 3 different DIAs. So I understand why you'd want to have it adjustable in the app, but I think it's too high a risk for people to immediately want to take their pump settings that they have now and apply a 3-hour or a 4-hour DIA to the app and get themselves into trouble and mess up all their settings. So.
And you didn't rewrite the screen, so you just have to know which one is which.
Oh, well, actually, I know where to do that too. Katie showed me where to do that.
Oh,
but yeah,
okay.
I update the language there. I just put parentheses, DIA 6, DIA 5.5, whatever. So I make notes so I remember, but yeah, that's what I do.
Well, how much trouble would people get into if they did that?
If you change it down to like 3 and 4 hours, it causes a lot of challenges. Even using the Walsh model is really Walsh model. You end up high. I've had a lot of people when I started helping them, they were using a Walsh at 3 and 4 hours, and they were actually ending up high, not low, most of the time. And then and then if they change the DIA on the other models, you can end up with what appears to be basal's too strong. You have a negative IOB when you're falling, but it'll mess up like everything else, your meals and stuff like that. Like changing it a little bit, a half hour, 15 minutes isn't big, but it still will affect basal and negative IOB and how that functions. So you got to use it carefully.
I guess loop dogs also, or loopkit, I don't remember, loop tips, mentioned that it will underestimate the bolus amount, so you would end up high.
Yeah, exactly. So it actually causes you to be high more than low a lot of times. And the wash model is just terrible. Just don't use it.
Yeah, that's true.
It should get removed.
It really should.
Could you just explain that?
The wash model?
Yeah.
So, real quick. So, yeah, go back to the models there. The way I try to explain it visually here is you can see that top line there is the wash model. See how much higher it is for the majority of, for pretty much the entire 6 hours. So it's assuming you have more insulin on board than the other models do. So if it assumes you have more insulin on board, it's going to be less likely to give you insulin and more likely to think you're going to go low as you progress through a meal, for example.
But if you do change it to like 4,
you have to get it down to 4. You see, it's still higher though for the majority of those, the first 2-3 hours. It's still higher than the other models. So even though you think you're cheating the system by reducing the duration of the insulin, the curve is still what's telling the system how much insulin you have on board. So that tail at the very end, the last 1.5 hours or so on the other models is so low. It's a very small amount of insulin. It's not. You're not gaining much back by shortening the number, but by using the Walsh model, you're going to be pretty much assuming you have more insulin in your body the entire time until the very end when you've shortened the number and it runs out like an hour early. So you're really not going to have as good an experience, especially with meals, with it like that. I've seen it probably like 10 times helping different people. So.
Then why does it exist? Why do we keep putting it in?
That's the one we used to use. That's actually the model. So this is good for everyone else too. This is actually the model that's in your pump, the Walsh model. So like if you when you use like the Omnipod PDM and you you look at your IOB, it's using the Walsh model to calculate how much insulin on board you have. Whereas when I was using Loop or X-Strip before we used Loop, it would calculate a much smaller number of insulin on board at the same, at 3 hours in than the PDM would. So I would basically just, if I ever look at the PDM IOB, I'd always cut it in half or cut it by 40% in my head to be like, oh, the PDM says she has a unit on board. She probably has about 0.6 or 0.5. That's why I used other apps like Night Scout or whatever that have better models than the Walsh model, but that's the same model that's in the pump. And so that's what they started with. That's what Loop began with, was the Walsh model, and they made the more, I forget what the name of this one is, but yeah.
That's the algorithm is called the glycogen, but I'm not sure of the model name.
Yeah. I saw it yesterday in Loop. I don't remember what it's called though. But yeah, not Walsh. It's not that.
Okay.
Yeah. Does that help, Joanne?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I wanted to throw in some facts for the FreeAPS, like you mentioned the PDM usage, and since Omnipod is not available in Russia nor in Ukraine, so we have to buy it ourselves from somewhere, and we're constantly seeking ways to do that. And PDM is another thing we need to buy, and since Loop doesn't allow you to enter your temporary basal rate, you cannot start with it from the beginning. So you have to buy the PDM, then you switch to the Loop or any other fork of it, and you just throw your PDM to your wardrobe or whatever. And now that we have the ability to set the temporary basal rate, the FreeAPS kind of replaces the PDM completely. And we don't have to buy the PDM anymore. The only thing that is missing from the FreeAPS right now is a square bolus, but you can try to do the same with the temporary basal rate. Yeah, but you have to do the calculation.
Interesting. And so if someone wanted to just use the Omnipods without the PDM and wasn't sure they wanted to close Loop yet, by making sort of,
or if they didn't even have the CGM yet.
Yeah.
Well, no. Initially, if you don't have the CGM, Loop won't allow you to do anything. You won't be able to bolus because
you would have to hand calculate it.
Yeah, that's true. And the initial idea of the manual setting of the temporary basal rate was mine because I was going on a vacation to Egypt and wanted to do snorkeling. And I asked Ivan to do this, and he said, like, I'll do this really rough, and you tell me how that goes. It went really well, and he tweaked that, the UI, and released that.
People
That
have
was
asked
in
for
his
it, and people ask for it, and I know why they kind of say no. They don't want people like taking over Loop, but I swear it's a great feature because it doesn't require an override to try to change something, and for being disconnected like snorkeling or swimming, it's a perfect use for it. It solves a lot of complicated problems. There's a whole page in Loop Docs dedicated to what you do when you're swimming, right? And you're going to be disconnected, and I think this sort of like takes care of that.
Yeah, I mean, if
they
you're
usually ask you to suspend the pump, from what I understand.
Well, on 2 pumps, you would just suspend because you're in disconnect. But yeah, I agree. I think it's great. So because people are usually what they do is they go in and they change the actual scheduled basal in Loop, and then they disconnect. But then that's actually changing what Loop calculates as your needed basal for that time period. So I think by being able to manually change it and your effective basal that Loop is calculating you need stays the same, but you get to change the rate running on the pump. I think it's great. It's a needed feature. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, another thing I wanted to add here is that I've experienced, like, when traveling around, I've experienced some situations where I would require less insulin, and naturally I would set an override. But with this thing, I saw that I needed both. Like, I set an override of 10%, then I set the temporary basal rate of that for like 5 hours or whatever, and then I just went away from my riding. In that way, Loop just assumes that I need less insulin, and I receive less insulin because of an override and because of the temporary basal rate. And then when I return, it calculates fine.
And you're making the override work while you're away, essentially, by doing that.
Yeah, that's true. And when you're suspending pump, from what I remember, it doesn't calculate that you're not getting insulin. It just assumes you're getting fine. You're getting the amount that is scheduled. From what I understand.
Yeah, I forget. I think I've gone back and forth on that. There is a bug now. I know that if you do a pod change and you don't suspend first, it continues to think you're getting basal during the whole pod change time.
Right.
So
if you get a screen where you can't deactivate, it
thinks you're getting basal. Yeah,
you got basal.
Yeah.
So the other question is the temp manual basal only working with Omnipod?
No,
it works with Medtronic.
Okay, someone said he can't find it. Robert says, where does he?
Only on open loop.
So you have to be open loop. There you go, and then tap.
And then you tap the
basal icon on top.
Basal icon.
The orange one in the middle.
Yeah.
Can't see Glenn's finger when he's touching it. So the orange one in the middle. And there it is. It's magic.
Wow. Okay, that's great.
It is. I keep forgetting it's there, but it's great. And it's actually probably one of the features that keeps me hesitant to go. I want to try the remote bolus and carbs. My daughter's going to go spend the night somewhere this weekend. But I also like having that manual thing, and I don't want to rebuild it. So it's nice.
I'm curious for your development in Russia. Are you supported by any source that gives you income, or is this all your free time? Uh-oh.
I'll let Ivan answer that, and he's muted.
Sorry, you got muted, Ivan. There you go.
It's all my free time. Nobody supports me.
Some people need to buy Ivan a bunch of coffee or something.
Not gift cards, yeah. If there are no more questions, I'm sure there will be follow-up questions.
Ivan, I do have a question for you. Could you show us your the Riley link that you get that you've gotten from the Russian builder?
Oh, sorry.
Couldn't stop sharing there, Glenn, so you can see him bigger.
Please repeat question. I don't understand.
Will you
They,
show
they
the
want you the Riley link.
hold it up to
Simeon.
the camera?
Riley.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a cool little square, and it runs on, from what I remember, like a AA battery or something,
There's
or AAA battery.
two batteries inside.
Nice.
3A batteries.
AAA. Okay. 3A. Yeah.
And it's work about 2 weeks on two batteries.
Wow.
Yes.
That's a long time.
Wow. So you don't have to charge it. I mean,
Yes, I know not
You're-
charge it.
You're not able to charge it because it just uses the alkaline batteries that are not rechargeable. Well, you can use rechargeable batteries, obviously.
have you tried that with lithium batteries?
What do you mean?
Instead of alkaline, using lithium 3A batteries.
Well,
Probably-
you can use it with any type of battery.
I know
It's
it
just
probably
like
go like a month or a month and a half.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's-
I'd love to get that unit exported to the U.S.
Well, have you guys seen the Emma link somebody else wrote too, using a different board and stuff that you can change the battery size, and it's much more efficient on power than the Riley. It'll go
we're
a
actually
couple of weeks.
we're actually looking more at the GNAR project. That is not a Riley link, if you know what, like GNU Riley link or something like that.
Uh-huh.
But that thing doesn't work with Omnipod from what I remember. But it successfully works with FreeAPS from what I know.
Cyril,
Well,
you use
with Medtronic.
Android APS with
Yeah.
the Riley link. Is that working pretty well for you?
Yeah, it's working great. I bought the cheap Samsung phone for $200 or something, just for that purpose. And I'm using the American Riley link that beats it, like from the official website.
Okay.
I don't know. I've heard people having issues with the Riley link from Simeon, Android app, but for the Loop and FreeAPS, it works perfectly fine. And I'm not sure if Simeon is planning to support this project anymore. Like, he abandoned it.
Okay.
There's a question here about the doctors in Russia and Ukraine. Do they support what you're doing? Do they give you trouble with it? Do they ask you questions?
They don't care.
Do they just say, good job, you're doing great, keep it up?
We have a lot of doctors that are like old school, that are like their beliefs are really different from the modern technologies, from the modern insulin types and everything. And like, I guess they assume that once you get the diabetes, you're gonna end up without legs, without like anything, with bad eyes, and like that you're practically dead pretty much in like several decades. And like, I know, well, there are doctors that support that know about CGMs, that know about pumps. Well, especially in Russia, I know a lot of doctors are pro pump. So they even can install the pump for you, and you even can get the pump in Moscow for free from Medtronic or Accucheck. And it's supported by government, I mean. But other than that, a lot of doctors are really not up to date with the technology. Well, I know my endocrinologist told me about the CGM. She told me that she heard about such things as APSs and everything, but she doesn't know anything about that. It's just they exist. I showed her the loop that I was using at that time. I don't remember if it was FreeAPS or just the JoJo branch from. I actually remember switching from JoJo to FreeAPS or something like that. And so she was quite interested in that. But other doctors are not that good at technology.
So do you have a local support group in the Russian countries where you connect and share information, or it's just the programmers connect?
We have like a group of diabetic people, diabetics, that share some information that they receive from elsewhere, and that help each other in trying to help to live with the diabetes. And that's actually the biggest source, I guess, of knowledge in Ukraine and Russia. And we end up doing really great with the tips from these groups, more than the endocrinologists.
I think we feel the same way here. The doctors aren't the source of information. It's
the thing is, in United States, you guys are really dependent on the FDA thing, and using your pump or your CGM in any other way could lead to some issues with insurance or whatever. I know about this issue in Russia where they introduced the Freestyle Libre sensors, and where people wouldn't want to tell about using some meow meow transmitters on top of that, but Libre allows you to simultaneously use the reader that you get by the Abbott, and the meow meow to transmit data to your phone. And thus you end up with a win-win situation. They are happy, the insurance is happy, the government's happy, and people are using that. As far as for the Dexcom, and I'm not sure on how to deal with that, especially for the people that use Android, and usually they are on XDrip. I've heard I know people that are using XDrip, and their endocrinologists in the United States are pretty fine with that. As long as your blood glucose is fine, I'm okay. I support that. And I know people that have issues that they cannot use their endocrinologists are just afraid of prescribing anything to you when you're using it wrong. And the Omnipod is the weakest thing here, because you just cannot use it simultaneously with PDM and with low. So, and here in Russia and Ukraine, Omnipod is not available, so we're buying it elsewhere, and we can do whatever we want with that. Medtronic pumps are okay with tampering around, because you just cannot tell what was the way of bolusing. You just check your pump every 5 minutes, and you're fine.
okay, just one more question here. Are there any plans to cap the insulin on board to some maximum value? Android APS and Open APS have this additional safety feature. Apparently is also available in Israel, same thing.
Yes, this feature is my roadmap.
All right,
Nice.
It's coming. That's great. Glenn, you want to close it?
All right. Well, thank you for coming today, and thanks, Ivan and Kirill, for joining us. If you have any further questions, please leave them in the comments. I believe both Ivan and Kirill have been monitoring the comments. Also, be sure to join the Telegram group. I will post the links to the Telegram loop on the loop page. We will have the Facebook Live recording will immediately be available, and we will introduce an edited Zoom video in a few weeks after it's been shortened up a little bit. And again, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you so
for
much.
having us.
Yes. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Great talk.